I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Maurice, who will be leading a session entitled A Roadmap to Building Housing on Synagogue Lands. Maurice is the president of Collective, a real estate development company that prides itself on building better communities by giving voice to resident needs and inspiring collective efforts to seeing those needs come to fruition.
And before we sort of get into the meat and potatoes here, I just want to take a moment on a housekeeping matter and clarify. I was the founder of Collective and the president until sometime in mid-August. So I'm no longer managing the activities of Collective day to day, but I continue to be involved in several projects. And certainly during my tenure there were a couple of our projects that really are germane to today's discussion, and those are 40 and 44 Broadway at Yonge and Eglinton, as well as 300 Bloor Street West. So I'll get into those a little bit as case studies. I just wanted to sort of, start by thinking about what it is that we're talking about, right? And we're talking about, we're calling it Synagogues and Parking Lots, but it really extends beyond synagogues. And the case studies that I'm going to touch on are not well, one of them kind of is, but we're talking about all sorts of institutions that have underutilized land holdings, that have certainly a tremendous amount of pressure to maintain their operation, and that really are in a place where we want to think about how to optimize land so that we can address many of the challenges of our current milieu. Like if we think about Toronto as a global city now, and we think about the pressures of affordability, transportation, resources, community services, facilities, there's a lot that we can do by thinking about land use in a three-dimensional way, I'll say. And that means several things, but in very plain terms, I think that we no longer need to think about segregating land use by land plot, but how do we begin to truly think about mixed use communities? We all know that we're going to see a continued population growth. We're expecting Toronto to have an additional 1 million or so people over the coming decade. We have not just a significant issue with affordable housing, but also a significant issue with the missing middle. And we're going to see that continuously be aggravated to a point where if we don't start using all of the resources at our disposal as, a collective, we're going to be faced with greater challenges. And so, whether it's some of the more challenged populations, like our seniors, like people who can't afford simply living in Toronto today, and we couple it with what we're seeing as an operational issue in whether it's our synagogues, our churches, our mosques, with generally a trend of dwindling congregation sizes coupled with increasing operational and capital costs. And how do we address this issue? So I wanted to just talk about, from a developer's perspective, at a very high level, and there's lots, I think, to get into and delve much deeper, but with the few minutes we have, how can we make things work? And so I think that for anyone who is involved in some sort of congregation, or anyone who is curious about a process that can be started. I think that as long as, first and foremost, a bid process would be a great place to start for any sort of congregation. A bid process does a few things. I think that it provides transparency, so fairness and accountability are inherent into a bid. It also allows a tremendous amount of creativity to come to the table. And when you have sort of a competitive landscape, there's healthy sort of economic, but as well as creative elements coming to the table. And I think that that's something that we really can spend hours on. But at a high level, that in itself is important. And I think that in today's world, we need to have a tremendous amount of care, diligence, and focus on the consultation process. So whether it's a consultation with the congregants or consultation with the broader community, we don't need only the immediate stakeholders who are managing processes here. We also need to understand from the individuals that know how these places and spaces work on a day-to-day basis, what they need, what is superfluous, how can we improve upon practices, whether it's the relationship that a synagogue may have with a school or a daycare center, or I don't know, a TTC parking lot next to it, whatever it may be. I think that consultation is paramount, and it has to happen before, during, and certainly after this sort of bid process, and during a redevelopment process. I think that the other way, the other element that I wanted to touch on in terms of how we do this is, just maybe spend a few brief minutes on talking about what does a developer do for an institution, be it religious or otherwise, that has the opportunity to optimize their land holdings. And so, developers, we can be many things. We can certainly be very creative in terms of a design process, understanding risks, understanding efficiencies, understanding whether it's cost controls or whether it's greater revenue generation. I think that that's an important ingredient in this entire recipe. How do we do this in a way that there's a fiduciary responsibility? I think that having that sort of partnership unlocks a lot of the inherent knowledge that we can bring to the table. This same applies, I think, for the approvals process. Approvals are getting more and more complex, whether it's strictly at a municipal level, sometimes provincially as well. There's layers and layers of approvals that take years, certainly no less than a few years, sometimes longer than that. And we also are able to provide, unlock this entire concept, dream, through addressing the financing requirements, which are a big part of it. Construction costs are skyrocketing in a place like Toronto and all over the world. And generally speaking, I think that the market is a very rational place, and as developers, we always maintain a margin, I'll say, on cost that's pretty uniform And so as we see costs rising, we see, you know, revenues and costs sort of rising. Sometimes they squeeze a little bit and sometimes there's a little bit more room. But generally speaking, the equity requirement, the amount of cash required for these projects is very significant today. And it's no longer something that can be done by, you know, fundraising, I think at a community level. There's a tremendous amount of expertise required, and there's also the underwriting that banks will lean on developers for, and I think that presents a lot of opportunities. And managing, of course, construction risks, which is not something that we expect any board of directors of a shul or any other religious institution to have expertise on, and I think that's what we can provide. You know, I want to take a few minutes just to talk about a couple examples that I've been fortunate to have been working on and continue to see what can happen when all of these different forces are put together. So, you know, starting with 300 Bloor Street West, which is a site that is owned by the Bloor Street United Church. It's also a site that's occupied by the city shul. And it's a site that has over 100 outreach programs. And so, you know, a place like that becomes a de facto community facility. It's not just a place of worship. It's a place of community. And again, when we have a building, in the case of Bloor Street, a building from the 1850s, you can imagine, I mean, first of all, it's in the state of disrepair. Just if we look at where the building is today, if we weren't to be doing a redevelopment there, fixing the roof and the boilers, which is required immediately, is just not possible. And so how does a congregation come out of this? The Bloor Street United Church got ahead and did engage in a bid process and did involve the development community, and Collective is now the development partner, to use the term loosely, on that project, where, you know, through that process, we were able to ensure both, I'm going to call it the social and economic sustainability of that site. Specifically, what I mean is we're rebuilding the church, the actual sanctuary and all support spaces, as well as building about 42,000 square feet of office space and a 29-story tower sort of in behind it, above it, cantilevering somewhat. The majority of the tower is comprised of condo units, and so that is what helps pay for this entire thing as a project expense, as a capital expense, one-time expense. But the 42,000 square feet of office that I mentioned becomes this economic engine that the Bloor Street United Church is now going to own in perpetuity and have a source of income, so that they never find themselves in the place that they're at today. I think that's a you know, very creative structure for addressing not just today's needs, but thinking long term and thinking about how we can, you know, ensure that we're planning for this entity to exist in perpetuity. You know, I think this is slightly different from the other case study I want to touch on, which is 44 Broadway at Yonge and Eglinton, and that is a Roman Catholic church that, you know, fits sort of the model of today's topic spot on. It's a church and a big parking lot. And so what we're actually doing there is, of course, we're going to be demolishing the church, and it's, you know, as a bricks and mortar facility, not accessible, issues with, heating and cooling and acoustics. And, I think like the sanctuary itself is fine, but all of the other spaces that really make this community what it is, some are underground with stairs that can't be reached. And so what St. Monica's, it's the name of the parish, is doing there, they have a tremendous amount of youth programs. They have, and they actually have, which is rare, a growing congregation. And when we see that a growing congregation is faced with issues of accessibility, for example, we want to make sure that that can be addressed. And so what we're doing there is quite similar. When we redesign the site, the church is actually coming to the front of the site and will have the presence on Broadway Avenue at a lower scale with the tower behind it. And that sort of relationship addresses things like the public realm. We're doing a public park in front, then the church, then it for the pedestrian realm, it really creates this sort of inviting feeling as you're walking by. And what it will also be doing is bringing in retired priest residences into the building. And so again, it's addressing different segments of the population and different segments of that institution that can really be unlocked through thinking about how do we optimize things. And the thing that I'll sort of close on, because I see I'm coming up on my time, is it's not an easy process. In fact, the challenges are multi-pronged at all different parts of this process. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that I noticed through being active in consultation and engaging with the congregants and all the membership is that there is a tremendous amount of resistance to change. And that happens at all levels, whether it's, the fact that this building means a lot because that's where all these major events for my family happened, or whether for the neighborhood there's concerns about construction noise and dust and activity and trucks and safety issues. I think that we really need to have a good understanding that the end of any era is a new beginning. And that's certainly what I think is at the core of what we're talking about. It's new beginnings. So with that, I thank you, and I will stick around, happy to chat. I saw some questions pop up, but we'll address in the breakout room, I think.